What is up, team? Welcome to the Read Aloud for Assignment 5 in Rise Up, hosted by yours truly, your teacher, Allie. Today's subject is the war on drugs and the crack epidemic. Fun. Our aim today is what were the causes and effects of the war on drugs? And your instructions for this assignment are to read the article below about the war on drugs under President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. And then you're going to answer the questions on the right that are highlighted in yellow based on that section of the reading. Your answers should be based on what you read in the text. They should be in your own words, so don't just be copying what you read in the text, right? I want you to try to put it in your own words. They should be 1 to 2 full sentences. And I will give you bonus points if you add random annotations connecting what you read here to other topics that we have recently learned about. It could be anything like the Southern Strategy, dog whistle politics, Nixon's Law and Order campaign, Reaganomics, the prison system and slavery, even intersectionality. I didn't mention that, but any of those things that you can connect to, I'll give you extra credit for doing. And you can do those bonus connections by just typing in this section over here, this connects to blah, 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 and explaining that connection in your own words. Okay? So, let's start reading the article about the war on drugs under Reagan. I'm going to read the question that's in the right-hand side first, and then I'll read the text. So the question you're answering is, why did President Reagan declare the war on drugs? And you can use the sentence starter, Reagan declared the war on drugs because. So let's read. I hope you can hear the train going by me. At the time President Ronald Reagan declared a war on drugs in 1982, drug crime was on the decline, or decreasing, lowering. It was not on the rise, and less than 3% of the American population identified drugs as the nation's most pressing concern, or most important problem. So why would he declare an all-out war on drugs at a time when drug crime is actually declining, or going down, not on the rise, and the American public isn't much concerned about it? Well, from the outset, or the beginning, the war on drugs had much less to do with concern about drug abuse and drug addiction, and much more to do with politics, including racial politics. President Ronald Reagan wanted to make good or follow through on campaign promises, to get tough on that group of folks who had already been defined in the media, news and TV, as black and brown, the criminals, and he made good or followed through on that promise by declaring a drug war. Almost immediately after his declaration of war on drugs, funds or money for law enforcement or police began to soar or increase. So use that section to answer the question on the right. Next section. The question you are answering is, although they are chemically the same, what is one difference between crack and cocaine? Hint, think about who uses each drug more. What are the punishments for each drug? So let's read. After the war on drugs started, the crack epidemic took place. The crack epidemic occurred in the 1980s through 1990s. Crack, a drug that is the same chemical as cocaine, but in rock form, had suddenly become incredibly popular and used by many people. Since it was the same type of drug as cocaine, but much cheaper, crack was more popular than cocaine in urban or city, low-income, black and brown communities. Even though crack and cocaine have the same chemical makeup, the punishment for possessing crack was much harsher, or meant more prison time, than the punishment for possessing cocaine. You can see the chart below. So just for context, if you look at this chart, on the left is the punishment for possessing different amounts of crack. And you can see that if you, to get 5 years in prison, all right, you had to be possessing 28 grams of crack, okay? But on the other hand, to get 5 years in prison for cocaine, you had to be possessing 500 grams of cocaine, okay? Meaning it was much easier to get prison time for a small amount of crack than it was for cocaine, okay? And the chart also shows who uses each type of drug, with the orange person representing how many of its users were black, the green representing how many of its users were white, and the gray representing how many of its users were Hispanic. So you can see that for crack, most of the users, 79%, were black. Only 10% were white and 10% of crack users were Hispanic. But when you look at cocaine, okay, where it was harder to be sent to prison for, okay, harder to be sent to prison, only 17% of users were black, where 28% of users were white and 53% of users were Hispanic, okay? So, based on either what you read here or what you see in the chart, what is one difference between crack and cocaine? Think about who uses each and what are the punishments for each. In the next section, you're going to answer the question on the right, why do you think the Reagan administration would publicize more stories about the dangers of crack than cocaine? Hint, you can think about which type of people uses crack versus which type of people uses cocaine, or what the punishments for crack were versus what the punishments for cocaine were. And there's a sentence starter here on the right if you want to use it. So let's read. So the Reagan administration actually launched a media campaign by putting out ads and making speeches to publicize or show in the news the crack epidemic in inner city communities, hiring staff whose job it was to publicize or show in the news inner city crack babies, crack dealers, or so-called crack whores and crack-related violence, in an effort to boost or increase public support for this war on drugs. They did not do the same for cocaine use, and even made the prison sentences for crack longer than sentences for the same amount of cocaine. Reagan also wanted to inspire Congress to devote or give millions more dollars to waging it or carrying out the war on drugs. So use this section to answer the question on the right. And then our last section of the assignment, the question you're answering for this part is, what was at least one effect of the war on drugs during the crack epidemic? Okay, there's a sentence starter if you want to use it. So one effect or outcome or change that occurred during the crack epidemic as a result of the war on drugs. The plan worked like a charm. Millions more dollars flowed to law enforcement, police, and prisons. The Pentagon began giving tanks and military equipment to local law enforcement or police to wage this war on drugs. And Congress began giving harsh mandatory minimum sentences or prison time for minor or small drug offenses. Sentences harsher than murderers receive, more than other Western democracies or similar countries. This overall led to a huge increase in the number of people, especially Black and Hispanic people, put in prisons, as shown in the chart below. So this chart is titled Incarcerated Americans from 1920 to 2008. In other words, the number of Americans in prison. Okay? We see from about 1920 to 1980, it stays under 500,000 people in prison, right? But then, as soon as 1982, when Reagan declared the war on drugs, we see that the number of people in prison starts to shoot up a lot, right? Until in about 2008, we have almost 2.5 million people. Okay, a big increase. So, using that graph, or what's written in the paragraph here, in your own words, tell me what was at least one effect of the war on drugs during the crack epidemic. That's your last question in the assignment. If you have any questions, you can email me, send me a message on Google Classroom, or you can text me if you want. Good luck!